Hello and welcome to In the News. It's coming to you from Voice of Nigeria. Today we have a very, very interesting topic, and it's the concept of leadership and the lessons for Nigeria. And to do justice to this program, I have with me today in the studio Professor Ebere Onwudiwe. He's a professor of political science and economics. He's also the executive director of the Ken Nnamani Center for Leadership and Development based here in Abuja. Professor, you're most welcome to the studios of Voice of Nigeria.
Thank you very much for having me.
I am Haji Asani, welcoming you all, and let's get straight into the issue. Give me, if you will, your concept, your own perception of the concept of leadership in Africa in general.
Well, we have noted over the years that the story of leadership in Africa has not been a very good one, and that a lot of the problems of development and instability in political affairs have been attributed to very bad leadership. But thankfully, that has begun to change. And we hope that with a good example that is emerging here and there, the story will change in the future.
It's easier said than done. I mean, the perception virtually all over Africa in particular and around the world in general is that we have this sit-tight kind of leadership structure in Africa, whereas you have democratic changes of governments that propel development across the world. There doesn't seem to be a marked improvement per se in terms of the styles of leadership that we've witnessed in Africa. Can you explain why this is?
Well, the issue of staying in power forever and ever is a very good way to begin the discussion of the problems of leadership in our continent. And we know that here in our country we have experienced that for several times, list of which is not the bad experience with the third term attempt by a former president of this country, Olusegun Obasanjo himself. And all over the continent, we have this problem going on in Burundi now, which is originating in in another attempt by another leader to overstay his welcome. And so that problem exists. So that's why I say it's a very good place to start. But I do also recognize when improvements are being made in that particular part of our problem. And the Nigerian current example is one good is one good way to look at this, because we have seen in our situation a peaceful change of government. And I think that is an example that the rest of Africa will learn as time goes on.
Essentially, in terms of the leadership skills that have worked to bring this about, that's somewhat absent. It's more like a people revolution, so to speak, that has led to this change of leadership that Nigeria is witnessing May 29. And it's the same story virtually across Africa. But let's stick with the Nigerian scenario and look at it critically now. What has been responsible for the kinds of leadership that either they're former military leaders or they're civilian administration that, eventually lack the leadership qualities that are required? What has been responsible for the choice of leadership that we get in Nigeria?
Well, part of the problem is followership and the inability of the general population to insist on the right people occupying the positions in government. And that's one. Another one is lack of democratic culture. And we are a developing democracy. Democracy has not taken root. And so the authoritarian patterns that our own traditional leadership in most parts of our countries had taken tend to be replicated when people take over national governments. And so a combination of factors, including underdevelopment, is also another factor. Is also another
underdevelopment. Can you expatiate?
Yes. Well, underdevelopment in terms of political development as well as economic development. Those are variables that explain, that contribute to the explanation of our inability to change regimes very, very amicably through our disrespect for institutions of governance and our overall cause with bad governance.
Let's go back to the issue of the types of leadership that we have witnessed. Africa in general, we have military officers who retire from the military and become politicians and thereby become leaders of the nation, again in civilian clothing. Whereas in countries like, say, for example, one of our brother nations, Ghana, we've had civilians, transiting. There appears to be a structure in Ghana. Is there something that Nigeria could learn from that in terms of how we produce our leaders?
Well, that's a good observation. Of course, Ghana is our neighbor, which gives us a cause to worry when we see how relatively well they're doing in these kinds of democratic transitions than we are. But they are not too far away from us. They also have their own history of militarism.
Yeah, with the Jerry Rawlings.
Yes, with Rawlings and the rest of them. And so, yes, we are learning by doing as it is now, because the military examples that we have experienced was much longer in their existence than the experience of other countries, and so that military culture, that military leadership style, has seemed to spill over into the civilian consciousness. And so even as we are in civilian rule, in democratic rule, certain elements of military behavior, of military approach to societal problems seems to remain. And but I believe that as we gain more experience with democracy, as we consolidate it more, as it deepens, these remnants of military patterns will disappear, and we will begin to do things more democratically.
Right. Let's look at the qualities that a leader is expected to bring to bear in terms of how he governs or how he runs a democratic establishment. Is it safe to say, given your experience as a political scientist, is it safe to say that we are far away from where we need to be in terms of the qualities that leaders who become presidents exhibiting?
Yeah, I think that's another good question. Well, the qualities of leadership in a democratic setting is one that calls for all elements of democracy to be part of the value system of the leader. Belief in accountability, belief in transparency, belief in inclusiveness. All those, a leader must imbibe and believe in and use in his actions, because his action sets examples for those who are following him. And if they now permeate down the line, the institution tends to take over, because people now believe that this is the appropriate way, because leadership is about observing processes and setting visions and convincing people without coercion by means of influence. And so if our leaders, whether they've had military experience or not, and they come into office and now want to believe that we are going to run this government through persuasion, through influence, rather than coercion or force, again, that will be another good check for our democratic growth. All right.
Give me, if you will, a comparative analysis of two solid examples that we have in Nigeria. The leadership style of President Olusegun Obasanjo and the leadership style of President Goodluck Jonathan, who's leaving office May 29. Give us a comparative analysis so we can actually visualize the qualities that we're talking about?
Okay. Well, let me say upfront that I believe that the outgoing president, Goodluck Jonathan, and even the president for whom he served as vice president, Yar'Adua, were by far more democratic than the Olusegun Obasanjo presidency. Of course, each president brought his own style. But I think in general, we cannot take it away from Jonathan that he respected the principles of democracy in the conduct of election, in the ability of the press to do and say what they feel is right for them to do without fear, freedom of expression, and so on. It's not that OBJ was also very terrible, but OBJ had
as General Obasanjo as his favorite. Yes, it's nicely called.
Exactly, yeah. Had a very open disposition, friendly disposition towards strong man leadership, and that strong man leadership has its militaristic
ideologies.
Yes, around it, you know, and so you can see that in observing how they approached certain issues. Obasanjo's approach towards Udi and Zaki Biam. And Jonathan's also approach where you dragged him kicking and towards the Boko Haram crisis.
Yes. When one looks at it from the African perspective, more continentally, in other words, would you agree that we've had a leadership structure in Africa that has not really exuded the kinds of intrinsic qualities of people who have integrity, rather than a general style of leadership that, just move along with the times and, mend it as you get along, How valuable is intrinsic integrity to leadership?
Well, I think we have had our share of leaders that showed no respect for integrity or even legitimacy. But we also have good examples of quite legitimate leaders who had great quantity of integrity to their credit. People like Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, Mandela of South Africa, yes. And back home here too, we have our own good examples of people who have done well. Shagari was great, even though people, because of our militaristic way of looking at things, think that those who approach democracy democratically are really dismissed as weak and so on, because of our exposure, long exposure to militarism. And it has seemed to numb us to those who do democratic things, who have healthy respect for democracy. And I think that that just at that ideological level, we have also had our own leaders, our own First Republic leaders at different levels, whether they were actually running government or not. But people like Aminu Kano, we have people with integrity that run this government. Even the people who were premiers at that time, we are also people of integrity. So I do think that we did have our own share of leaders with integrity.
You're listening to In the News. It's coming to you from Voice of Nigeria. I have with me in the studio today Professor Ebere Onwudiwe, Executive Director of the Ken Nnamani Center for Leadership and Development. And we've been looking at the concept of leadership and lessons for Nigeria. You can listen to Voice of Nigeria anytime on radio as well as online on www.voiceofnigeria.org. We're continuing with the program now, and let's move on to issues that are more germane to the generality of the people of Africa and specifically to Nigeria. Issues of discipline and how that impacts on leadership and leadership styles across board. What would be your assessment of this discipline, the level of discipline in Nigeria, for example?
I think, to be honest, our level of discipline needs to be improved. It needs to be improved in many, many, many aspects of life, not just in governance. But I think this is also the case that effective action by government in promoting this discipline through civics,
orientation programs,
will help matters, because we are not a very literate country, and it is not that illiteracy is a value for indiscipline, but it really, in order to create effective national discipline, you should have here first of all the Nigerianization of Nigerian population, and I've often said that every Nigerian needs to first see themselves as Nigerian before they see themselves as members of their own ethnic groups. And as long as we create that level of national consciousness, as soon as we create it, the level of patriotism is going to rise. And some of the things we do without minding what it costs our country will be diminished as your level of patriotism increases. You see this country now, you see the business of this country as your business. And you run this country as you run your own home. Because this indiscipline is only in public behavior, most of the time. I don't think the indiscipline is rooted in who we are. I think it is rooted in our approach to our nation. I think that's where it is made manifest. And so if we can amalgamate the people of Nigerians into one people rather than the previous amalgamation we had, which was just an amalgamation of
regions,
of regions, of administrations, which is a very easy thing to do. What you need is to create one Nigeria in the sense of creating one people, in the sense of creating one nation, which is different from having one country.
I think probably the twin to the issue of discipline is the issue of corruption. Nigeria has had a very bad run in terms of the image with which the country is viewed internationally, regionally, and indeed continentally. What is your take on measures by leaders across board to address issues of corruption in Nigeria? And what would be your advice, as a second leg to that question, to the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari? What would be your advice to his government?
Well, my first advice would be that he recalls the saying that action speaks louder than voice, that this country should be tired by now about different administrations coming in and off the cuff saying they will do this and that to corrupt people. And after 4 years or how many other years they stay in government, they do nothing. All the corrupt people are walking around, living large on stolen wealth of this country. And so if this incoming administration wants to do something that will set it apart from the previous administrations, it should bite the bullet and start getting the people who are corrupt and shaming them by putting them in trial. I mean, not just go around going crazy on everybody that have rumors of corruption. That's not what I mean. But you have to actually tackle corruption by setting example. And you have to do it irrespective of the party that the person belongs to. So if I'm corrupt and I'm APC, go after me as well. And if I'm corrupt and PDP, go after PDP. That's when it will be legitimate. If you're going to raise the axe only on people who are not in your party, then it will not be legitimate in the eyes of Nigerians. That's one. Yeah. Another thing to do about corruption is to do what I think many other developed countries have done with those tax dodgers in their countries, and that's called tax amnesty. We should do some kind of corruption amnesty in Nigeria, because there's corruption everywhere, from the United States to United Kingdom, from Brazil to all these hackneyed examples we give about countries that were our mates before, like Indonesia, Malaysia, Brazil, and the rest of them. All these countries, that's great reports of corruption in these countries, but they're still moving forward. For us, the greatest problem with corruption is not the stolen money. It is the shipping of that wealth abroad. That's what is causing the greatest damage here. because you ship the wealth abroad. There is not enough liquidity in our banks to lend monies. People can't borrow money to buy houses. People can't borrow money to create good businesses that will employ people because the money has been shipped abroad. So this government must do something to attract that money back. And the best way to do it is through tax corruption amnesty. Calling these corrupt people and say, look, we have these records and we give you 4 or 5 months to keep 20% and bring 80% back, keep whatever ratio.
Arrangement.
They just arrange it. And you get some of that money back. Some countries have gotten back $75 billion in stolen tax monies. And United States have done it. Italy has done it. So many other countries have done it. So it's not pandering to corruption to do this. But all those who refuse to do this, you then clamp on them. Those are the ones I'm saying that you should throw in jail. You should now, if they don't do it within a specific period of time, then you let the hammer on them.
Right. Very wonderful advice you've given here. But do you see the Nigerian judiciary or the judiciary as it is today in Nigeria being able to handle this type of a policy should it be put in place?
Now you're talking about institutions. You know, the judiciary in this country is the third leg of our government, isn't it? Yes. And it's supposed to be equal and separate branch of government. And so if we can make it possible for this independence to be in real terms, I think our judiciary, we can begin to trust them because they will now be producing people that have some integrity. I think it's the integrity you raised at the beginning of this conversation is more important even in the judiciary than everywhere else. Because if the branch that interprets our laws is not able to do it, then the fight against corruption is going to be a long, long way from being won.
Yeah, you just spoken about several institutions required and judiciary just being one of the many institutions. The security services, for example, is another arm that sine qua non to any fight against corruption. However, there have been several allegations of even fraud in the management of the resources of some of these agencies. One would like to see what perceptions should we inculcate in the security agencies in order to elicit the kind of responses that would help us to propel good leadership.
Yes, well, you know, our security agents, I have deep respect. I was a soldier myself. So I have this respect for our security agents, and I've worked with them. I was a consultant to the military since I came back here. And I feel very sad that in the course of this war against Boko Haram, their reputation have been tarnished. And I think we should be very, very reticent in continuing the tarnishing of the reputation of our military. Because without the military, we really don't have any country. Yes, we don't have any country because without the military, there is no other profession where people give their life to protect the other as the military is. Now, this is not saying that gives them a license to be corrupt, but it's just that we have to have very high level of proof to say that there are this level of corruption in the military or not. But I think if anybody is in any position to clean the military, Buhari is the man to do it. President is the man to do it. Because his own, I predict governance by personal example. That's what I see in him. And his own demonstration of discipline is obvious for everyone to see. So he is really coming in at the right time to clean this emerging distrust of our military, which I think is very dangerous to the health of this country. And is also very dangerous to the respect that this country enjoys around the world. Because, you see, one of the important areas for which we have earned international respect is the work of our military overseas, in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, everywhere in the world. The military has performed at excellent levels. And yet, all of a sudden, they're being treated as a bunch of no-goods who run at the first sight of fire. And that's not true. We have received commendations from the United Nations, from the global powers. The Nigerian military has been depended upon by the United States to take care of regional affairs in this place and outside Africa even. So really, I think that the general should do whatever it takes to clean house. If there are a few bad apples there, to get rid of them, and then do whatever he can to stop all this talk about Nigerian military being corrupt and ineffective. That is a bloody lie. I think it's a bloody lie. But if there's been elements of truth in it, I think it should be stamped out with alacrity.
Finally, let me take from you a last word in terms of the economics. A new government is taking power this May 29th, Friday, that is. It's coming in at a time when there is virtually an empty purse, so to speak. What are the immediate economic challenges that you see before this administration, and how can they tackle it so that they can sustain government, at least in the first 6 months?
Well, I think the immediate challenge that we have is the oil market. The fact that oil price, which is the bulk of our income, of federal government income,
revenue.
Yes, is the price of oil is falling internationally. And this is very, very, very important because, you see, our oil has an important quality, and it is imported by the international market, not only for consumption, but to use in refining their own oil that is syrupy. Ours is very, some say this is exactly the reason why the international community does not care whether you have refinery here or not, because they need a lot of our oil to get this other thick oil, bad oil that they have, to refine it. And now our biggest market, the United States, is no longer going to be buying our oil, because it's getting this shell oil, and that shell oil has the same quality as the Nigerian oil. So the demand for Nigerian oil is going to go down. It's already down, of course. But worse is that the demand, the U.S. shale oil market may become our competitors in Asia and in the Americas. So the bad news is lying around the corner, huge. And so what does Buhari do? Now, if I'm Buhari, one priority will be to take care of the massive number of poor people that are really his best support base, to come up with programs that are going to create jobs, programs that are going to help these people have some economic base to make income, and the people they need the help. The next thing is to try whatever he can to use not politicians but professionals who can help the economy grow, who will come up with good economic advice. Even if they have been out of office, we have very brilliant people like the current emir of Kano, a very good economic head in his somewhere. Yes, well, economic brain.
That's Sanusi Lamido.
Yes. And then there's so many other people that he can use, and these people don't have to be APC members either. And so because we have a very drastic situation that needs very creative solution. And I think he should use good economists and take their advice seriously, and of course choose the ones he will implement.
You've been listening to In the News, and we've been talking with Professor Ebere Onwodiwe of the Ken Nnamani Center for Leadership and Development. We've been looking at the concept of leadership and the lessons for Nigeria. Do join us again next week for another very interesting edition. Let me first of all say thank you so much, Professor, for being our guest.
For having me.
Our producer has been Ali Othman, as always, and I am Haji Asani saying thank you for listening. Join us next week for a very interesting edition. Bye for now.